As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So Putin showed this document and said, quote, "As you know, a string of talks between Russia and Ukraine took place in Turkey so as to work out both the confidence-building measures you mentioned and to draw up the text of the agreement. We did not discuss with the Ukrainian side that this treaty would be classified, but we have never presented it nor commented on it. The draft agreement was initialed by the head of the Kiev negotiation team. He put his signature there," end quote. And he pointed to the signature. So according to RT, the treaty, which is titled the Permanent Neutrality and Security Guarantees for Ukraine, it required Ukraine to enshrine permanent neutrality in its constitution, and the US, Britain, Russia, China, and France are listed as guarantors for Ukraine. And since the treaty was a draft, that means that it wasn't finalized and more details, need to be worked out. I'm sure there's a lot of questions about these security guarantees that these countries were supposedly going to give. But Putin's claim reflects an article that was published in Foreign Affairs last year, which cited multiple former senior officials who said that Ukraine and Russia tentatively agreed on a peace deal in April 2022. They said that the agreement would have involved a Ukrainian promise not to join NATO in exchange for a Russian withdrawal to the pre-invasion lines, and Ukraine would have received security guarantees from several countries. Russian and Ukrainian officials met face-to-face in Istanbul, Turkey on March 29th, 2022. So those negotiations were followed up by virtual consultations. So what's interesting is that after that meeting, that same day, I remember this because I wrote an article about it, Russia's lead negotiator, said the talks were constructive, and the Russian Defense Ministry announced that it would drastically reduce military activity near Kiev, because when Russia first invaded, they came in from the north from Belarus. And this led to the complete Russian withdrawal from the north there. So, it was timed with these talks, and they said they were pulling out to foster more peace talks. Putin said that after the Russian withdrawal, Ukraine abandoned the treaty. He said, quote, "We pulled our troops away from Kiev as we had promised to do. The Kiev authorities tossed their commitments into the dustbin of history. They abandoned everything," end quote. So Ukraine accused Russian troops of intentionally killing civilians in the northern areas that it withdrew from, most notably in the Kiev suburb of Bucha, or Bucha. I forget which way you pronounce it. But if Putin's account is true, Western pressure could have also led to Ukraine scuttling the treaty. So this is, some background that I've gone over a lot, but we know that Boris Johnson, when he was the prime minister to the UK, he went to Kiev on April 9th, which was just a few days after Russia completed its withdrawal from the north. And according to Ukrainska Pravda, which is a Ukrainian newspaper, Johnson urged Zelensky not to negotiate with Russia. And he said that even if Ukraine was ready to sign a deal with Putin, Kiev's Western backers were not. And the Ukrainska Pravda report said that at the time, Russia was ready for a Putin-Zelensky meeting, but the two factors stopped it from happening. And the two factors were the discovery of dead Ukrainian civilians and Johnson's visit. I always point to these comments from Turkey's foreign minister in April 2022. He said, after the talks in Istanbul, we thought this war was going to end soon. And then there was a NATO summit. And at that NATO summit, he realized that some NATO countries wanted to prolong the war. Why? Because they wanted to weaken Russia. And then just a few days after that, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin admitted that it was one of the U.S.'s goals to weaken Russia. That's why they were supporting Ukraine. Right, the next one here, Putin says that the first Russian nukes have arrived in Belarus. So Putin said this on Friday, that the first batch of Russian tactical nuclear weapons has arrived in Belarus and that the full deployment will be completed by the end of the year. He said that the deployment will serve as a warning. He said, quote, "so that everyone who is thinking about hitting us strategically will not forget about this fact," end quote. When asked about the news on Saturday, President Biden called the deployment irresponsible. Putin has compared the move to NATO's nuclear sharing program, under which there are US B-61 nuclear gravity bombs that are stored in Italy, Germany, Turkey, Belgium, and the Netherlands. When Putin first announced the deployment, he said it was being done in response to the UK providing Ukraine with depleted uranium ammunition, which causes environmental damage and is linked to cancer and birth defects. And the Wall Street Journal just reported last week that the US, it looks like, is also going to arm Ukraine with depleted uranium when the US made Abrams tanks make it over there. So, maybe Russia will respond to that as well in some way. 4 months after canceling his trip to Beijing, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang in the Chinese capital in a push to ease tensions between the two countries that both sides called constructive, and ended with an agreement to continue discussions in Washington. It doesn't seem like, again, ahead of the trip, there was State Department officials saying that, don't expect much. We don't really expect to resolve any issues here. We just want to manage the competition. That's how they're framing it, as a managing of competition. And I know that Qin, from the Chinese side, he said during the meeting apparently that U.S.-China relations are at their lowest point since they were established in 1979. And he's definitely right about that. So the one substantive thing that came out of this was that Blinken invited Qin to Washington. So it looks like he's going to be visiting the U.S. at some point. And now Blinken on Monday is expected to meet with Wang Yi, who is President Xi Jinping's foreign policy advisor. One from Peter Van Buren, the DeSantis torture question at the American Conservative. And that is about DeSantis, who's running for president now. He worked at Gitmo at Guantanamo Bay, and he's never really said much about it. And there's accusations that he was present for torture. And he said that he said himself once that he recommended, the force feeding of prisoners at Gitmo. So, there's just a lot of questions about what he did there exactly. You could always support antiwar.com at antiwar.com/donate. Share the show, tell people about antiwar.com and all that. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Again, World War II is an ancient history. I tell the story of why I own the 3 of the most historic buildings in America. They're right around the corner. I came back from Berlin in 2012. I left on April 17th. 2012, came back on April 27th. And they're showing me around where East Berlin is. And, I'm saying, this place is beautiful. Parks everywhere. No building over 16 stories. I mean, it's beautiful. And I'm having a beer, sitting with the people, looking across the street about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the main drag over there. And I see a beautiful 1880s, maybe, German building. At the same height, all new construction. And I realized everywhere I went, I'd see these beautiful, beautiful German buildings and all new construction, blown out from the war. And Berlin was grander than Paris before it was bombed out. And I'm thinking to myself, in the 1930s, the Germans were at the height of Western civilization, scientifically, culturally, philosophically. I'm thinking of all the great German names, Beethoven, Bach, Wagner. And I'm saying to myself, where were the people? Why didn't you stop this? That's what happened to this country. From that to this, a toilet bowl. Look at the way the people look. Look at the way they dress. I go out to eat, I see guys my age with fucking baseball caps on. Younger guys wear them on backwards. What are you waiting for, a catcher's mask? How about some style and grace? Could you get that one, man? It's gone. If we don't have a Renaissance, what followed the Black Plague? The Renaissance. The people realized they were fucked up. They were killing themselves, so they went back to the past. Alla Romana all'antica, in the manner of the Romans and the ancients, to describe the quality of their work. And look at the fucking shit that they make now. Everything is shit. The furniture's shit. Everything looks like shit. The cars. I remember when cars had style. Every little fucking car looks alike, like a small hearse. No style, all gone. All gone. Because the bigs have taken over everything. There's no choices anymore. When I was a young guy, there were grocery stores, there were hardware stores, there were stationery stores, and now there are grocery chains, hardware chains, drug chains, stationery chains. We've been chained. And we're spending all this fucking money sending kids to school. For what? What does it cost? I think it's like $140,000 from kindergarten to 12 so you could drive an Amazon truck or work at a fucking Amazon place? Oh, I think I'll drive a FedEx truck. I think I'll get a job at Walmart. No, I'd rather work at Target. The old days, you had these jobs, and you built yourself up. If we don't turn this around, again, World War II is not ancient history. This is going to be World War III. It's already started. Hey, Frank, give me a gun. Give me a hand grenade. I want to go blow this guy's brains out across the street. Frank gives me the gun and the hand grenade. I blow the guy's brains out. Is Frank an accessory to the crime? This is mission creep like they did in the Vietnam War. Go back to Dwight D. Eisenhower, 5-star general, supreme commander of the Allied forces, and listen to his farewell address, January 17th, 1961. The military-industrial complex is robbing the nation of the genius of the scientists, the sweat of labors, and the future of the children. This country wasn't supposed to have a huge standing military. It was only to be there if we needed it. The plow makers, then they turned into making, tanks and other stuff. They just changed. It wasn't about a war machine. We have evil, satanic, demonic people in charge. And if we don't rise to a higher level, Jack, you're dead. It's over. And they're taking us there. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Now it's one bad rap. and that fucking stupid beat everywhere I go. Boom, 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 boom. Not an ounce of boogie, not a drop of jive. They killed it. They killed it. The geeks killed it, and the people swallow their shit. I don't carry a cell phone. That's right. One of the only guys around that doesn't carry a cell phone. I did work for the cellular telecommunications industry back in 1994 when they had these boxes and trunks with an aerial. And I read about radio frequency radiation beginning then and keep reading about it now when they publish it. According to the University of California, Berkeley, if you're on a phone for 17 minutes a day for 10 years, your chance of getting a brain tumor only increased by 60%. So anyway, I don't carry it. So I love music and I get my mind off it. And again, I surround myself with beauty. I take care of all these things. Fans sent me this. This is Napoleon's march to Moscow, leaving Poland with 420,000 men and coming back with 10,000. It's a famous chart. You don't beat the Russians. It's very simple as that. Operation Barbarossa by Hitler, they killed about 20 to 25 million. There's a great peace speech by JFK in June of 1963, 5 months before they assassinated him. And he was saying basically the same thing, you don't fight the Russians. And then he says how great the Russians are culturally, scientifically. He said they're good people. And he goes on to say how many of them were killed, and that we share a lot. And then at the close of his speech, Kennedy's speech, again, this is June 1963, 5 months before he's assassinated, he said, America will not go to war. 8 months later, after he was assassinated, took us to war in Vietnam.
Here's President Putin asking, this is really terrifying, Phil, but you can form your own judgment of it. Is the U.S. trying to provoke us?
The Kremlin, there are terrorist attacks organized by Kiev, and of course all those drone attacks, including the Kremlin. On the one hand, the Biden administration is quite categorical in saying that they do not approve of such actions, and they never promoted the destruction of Nord Stream 1 and 2. Can you evaluate it, and how are you going to deal with it? You know, everything you mentioned, these are their attempts to provoke us to some powerful counteractions. The attempt to hit and cause some damage to the Kremlin and all those assaults on the Belgorod region and villages near the border. All these are attempts to provoke us. So if we destroyed 5 Patriot complexes near Kiev, so what do you think? Can we destroy any building in Kiev? There are no limitations for us, but we don't do it due to a number of considerations.
So his argument is the U.S. is trying to provoke us, but we're not going to be provoked. We could be far more destructive of the American vassal state, Ukraine, than we have been. I think he's right on the mark, Phil.
Yeah, I think he is too. And I think he tends to be the only adult in the room. This is scary stuff. I mean, this goes beyond the usual kind of American intervention overseas where you pick on some third world country, beat the hell out of them and sit back and smile. This is dangerous stuff, and nobody seems to get it. We have senators saying things like, well, we are calling for the assassination of Putin. We have other senators saying that he should be removed from power as a condition of negotiations. So, this guy is reading the writing on the wall. It's talking about him, but it's talking about the integrity and the security issues that are fundamental to how Russia sees itself. So, we need a straight talk. I'm still waiting for somebody to explain in simple English exactly why the United States is there at all now.
There are now nuclear weapons in Belarus. Here's President Putin on the significance and purpose of nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons have been created to ensure our security in the widest sense of this word and the existence of the Russian state. But firstly, there's no need for that. And, all these discussions and considerations, they reduce the level, the threshold for using such weapons. And secondly, we have more such weapons than the Western countries. And that is why they move us towards beginning these discussions. No way.
We have more nuclear weapons than the Western countries. Is that true? And is he including Israel?
Well, it's certainly true in terms of the numbers that have been published by the Defense Department in the U.S. And also by international monitors who follow these kinds of issues. But I don't think anyone really knows with any certitude how many actual deployable nuclear weapons the U.S. has or Russia. But it does seem Russia has more of them. And of course, countries like Israel and Pakistan, also nuclear armed, have basically secret programs that have unknown numbers of nukes and ways to deliver them. So this is a mess. The more you mix this up, the stranger it gets. And again, I and maybe the American public, I think increasingly the American public, would like to hear, why the hell is this going on at all?
Phil Giraldi, is Taiwan a legal part of the People's Republic of China?
Yes, it's legally and with the consent of the United States government, part of China, recognized as being part of China. That happened quite some time ago when we normalized our relationship with China. That was one of the conditions. So this debate over Taiwan and how we are going to be defending Taiwan, we'd be defending one province of China against the central government.
So if Taiwan, if the mainland China decides to use military force to compel Taiwan to recognize its own status as a part of mainland China, should we expect the United States to get involved in that conflagration?
I unfortunately would expect us to do it, even though it defies all logic and all reason. Again, this is an issue like Ukraine. I mean, there's no plausible reason or no reason compelling enough to confront China over an issue like this. We have already conceded that that Taiwan is part of China, as was done with Hong Kong some years ago with the British, as you might recall. That eventually transitioned into Hong Kong becoming pretty much fully integrated with mainland China, with all of China, the rest of China. And presumably this is something that may happen down the road with Taiwan. I'm not sure the Taiwanese even want us to go to war on their behalf, particularly if they're watching what's going on in Ukraine.
So unlike Ukraine, to be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion.
Yes.
Well, that's terrifying, Phil, but it's about as crystal clear as he's ever been.
Yeah, I mean,
he's talking about troops on the ground. He's not talking about sending howitzers and missiles.
Yeah. Well, one can maybe presume that he's delusional at the moment, making that kind of response. It doesn't make any sense to me, because basically, if you're looking for national security issues that are vital to defend by going to war, this ain't one of them.
Let me ask you this. Does the American intelligence community spy on the president? When Joe and Jill are talking about where are his slippers when he gets up in the morning or when he goes to bed at night, does the American intelligence community hear that?
I would have to suspect they might. That's as far as I can go.
The doctor we want to talk about a little bit is this Dr. Peter Hotez.
Yeah.
And he has a strong opinion about debates. He says, oh, that's below our dignity. We write intellectual papers and we do science. We work on the truth. You know, could anything be further from the truth than that attitude? But anyway, people now have found out that he is not straightforward. He's been challenged by Rogan and others. And there's this thing on that he's been challenged. I guess Rogan maybe started that.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're so smart, why don't you debate Robert Kennedy? You make fun of the guy. Maybe you're doing that because his voice has a difficulty.
Yeah.
Anyway, they figured that they would, move on this. And of course, Ortez, the doctor, who doesn't, what would you expect? He doesn't even believe in debates.
No way.
He says, I'll write a paper on this and explain what the facts are, and we'll work on the truth.
He made Fauci look like a calm person, the most hysterical, pro-mask, pro-vax, pro-isolation, pro-lockdown, everything. Of course, he never suffered from it. But here he is. He's back in the limelight. He was on Joe Rogan's show. We can put up that first, that first clip. And this is from Zero Hedge. Double-talking vaccine scientists refuses to debate RFK Jr. despite $1.5 million charity pot. In fact, that went up to $2.6 million. And if you put the next one on, so here he was on Rogan, and we're going to listen to it in just a second. Joe Rogan first challenged Peter Hotez to debate RFK on the science of vaccines in 2019, but he declined. And here's what he said at the time. He's an attorney and he's very clever and he knows how to do arguments in court. And what am I? I'm a scientist. And let's listen to this clip. Now let's listen to 1 minute and 3 seconds of Rogan talking to Hotez about RFK. And this is where Hotez is trash talking RFK Jr. This is how it started. So that's 1 minute and 3 seconds of this approximately.
Now I know that Robert Kennedy Jr. is he's a big one. He's a big one, and he seems like a very intelligent guy. How could he not be aware of the science behind this, and what is he getting wrong?
What he's getting wrong is just about everything. He's formed an organization called Children's Health Defense, He had a press conference about it. I think it was September, October of last year. It is probably one of the best organized anti-vaccine groups out there. Now, he's doing other things other than vaccine. He's doing a lot of things about environmental health and things like that. I don't know any part of that business. I've only followed what he does with vaccines, but it's all nonsense.
Why is he doing this about vaccines?
I don't know. What's his motive? I mean, you have to ask him what's his motivation.
Would he be a guy that you would want to have a debate with or have a discussion with?
But again, I mean, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of a debate because it's like debating. I don't know. It's like debating a Holocaust denier whether the Holocaust exists. I mean, not that this rises to the
I
same
understand
level,
what you're saying, but if you're again, I want to bring this up.
Basically, debating RFK Jr. about vaccines is like debating a Holocaust denier.
Yeah.
That was really goofy stuff, wasn't it?
Well, that's unbelievable, but that's how a demagogue operates.
Yeah.
They think, all you have to mention is get this one word in and appear like you're really intellectual, and you will shift the debate. But I don't think it's going to be that easy because that was only the beginning of the pressure put on him to debate Robert.
And if we put the next clip on, so after that, he had a little hissy fit. If you can put this on, Dr. Hotez did, and he was so mad that Spotify is allowing Joe Rogan to be on its, as one of its podcasters. Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine information. It's really true, just awful. And from all the online attacks I'm receiving after this absurd podcast, it's clear many actually believe this nonsense. And so Joe Rogan responded, Peter, if you claim what RFK Jr. is saying is misinformation, I'm offering you $100,000 to the charity of your choice if you're willing to debate him on my show with no time limit. To which Robert F. Kennedy responded, Peter, let's finally have the respectful, congenial, informative debate that the American people deserve. And of course, Hotez declined, saying, as you say, I'm a scientist, I don't debate.
Right. That was just recently come out on a Zero Hedge, and it really annoys me. It's the issue of entrapment. It's been around for a long time, and I got to thinking, how often have we ever seen the government agents, whether it's the CIA, the FBI, the IRS, or some other group in entrapping somebody, encourage them and works with them, bribes them, do all these things. You just don't read the stories. And I think they're more vicious than the people who do it because they're committing the crime. And I think when they're caught in entrapment, they ought to receive the same penalty as the people that they entrapped. But that isn't the case. Matter of fact, I don't think they get punished very often. But the FBI groomed developmentally challenged 16-year-old to become a terrorist and then arrested him. And it's a detailed, a bit complicated. Dollars were engaged, no big money, and all of a sudden they got enough evidence, and then they arrested him. I don't think they have him in prison, but here they make him the monster, and he wouldn't have even existed, without the FBI doing this to him. So that to me is a tragedy, and we should have a tough law on this one, that when you entrap somebody, you get punished for the same disease you got somebody else to commit, and you yourself ought to be fined on top of it all. But unfortunately, sometimes they're seen as heroes because they're going in and they're infiltrating and they find out stuff. Yeah, like January 6th. Yeah, because if they're doing something wrong, well, it'll come out in the evidence in the trial. Yeah, J6 trial. We got to see all that film and realize exactly what the FBI was doing. That is criminal when our government creates the crimes and participates in it. But a lot of people would make the case that government basically is a criminal operation, and when they take money from one group and give it to another, as some have said for many years, that is theft. I mean, you can't do it yourself. Why can you send the government to do all your dirty work for you? That to me is a real tragedy. But the only thing that we can combat that with is just trying to expose the truth to the best of our abilities.
Now let us turn to a philosopher who flourished about 20 years after Heraclitus, about 480 BC, and who represents a diametric opposite viewpoint, Parmenides. Parmenides. Parmenides comes from the town of Elea, E-L-E-A, and so his philosophy is frequently referred to as Eleaticism, or the Eleatic philosophy. Parmenides is the first, judging by the fragments that we have, to support his convictions with reasoned argument. The first, we have a connected whole poem of his extant, and he does not simply announce in Heraclitus' oracular fashion his conclusions, but lets us in on the actual reasoning that he adopted. He is profoundly opposed to Heraclitus' view, to the view that everything is an identity of opposites, or that nothing is, everything is becoming. His entire philosophy derives from one basic principle, which I will give you in my own words, but the substance of it is his principle. What is, and what is not, is not. And what is not can neither be nor be thought about. I'll repeat that because that is the essence of Parmenides. What is, and what is not, and what is not can neither be nor be thought about. Now, if you want to hear Parmenides' own formulations of this, I'll quote you from some of his fragments. Quote from Parmenides. Come now, I will tell thee, and do thou hearken to my saying, and carry it away. The only two ways of search that can be thought of. The first, namely, that what is, and that it is impossible for it not to be, is the way of belief, for truth is its companion. The other, namely, that what is not, that I tell thee is a path that none can learn of at all. For thou canst not know what is not. That is impossible, nor utter it. Unquote. Now, as you gather, that is an unmitigated repudiation of Heraclitus. Heraclitus says everything is and isn't. And Parmenides says absolutely not. If it is, it is, and if it isn't, it isn't. What is, and what isn't, isn't. In regard to the Heracliteans, he has very pointed words. He refers to them in one fragment, quote, as mortals knowing not who wander two-faced. Helplessness guides the wandering thought in their breasts, and they are borne along stupefied like men deaf and blind. Undiscerning crowds who hold that it is and is not the same and not the same, and that all things travel in opposite directions, unquote. In other words, out with the Heracliteans. And one more fragment from him. For this shall never be proved, that the things that are not are. And do thou restrain thy thought from this way of inquiry, unquote. Now, what does it mean, his basic principle? Well, it is, of course, the earliest formulation in the history of thought of what Ayn Rand in Galt's speech formulates as existence exists, and its meaning is the same. And therefore, it includes the following elements. First, there is a reality, which he refers to as what is, that which exists. Reality exists, and only reality exists. What is, and only what is, is. What is not, is not. And another point implicit. What is not can never be thought about. In other words, all thought must be thought about existence, about what is. It is impossible, according to Parmenides, ever to think about what is not, or to know what is not, or to have any cognitive relation of any kind to what is not. Now, if you doubt this, perform a mental experiment right now. Try. I want you for a second to think about nothing. Now, I don't mean the letters N-O-T-H, because that's something. And I don't mean a black wall, that's something. I mean nothing. Absolutely nothing. What is not? Okay, go ahead and have a thought. Now, you see, you cannot do it, because as soon as you think about something. You think about what is. And thus, Parmenides' famous line, thou canst not know nor utter what is not. It is simply empty. There is no what is not, and therefore you can't think about it. And this, of course, is the view that ultimately appears in Galt's speech as in the full developed philosophy as the view that consciousness is the faculty of perceiving that which exists. In this sense, the earliest source of these crucial ideas are Parmenides. And he is therefore an extremely important, and in this respect, an extremely good philosopher. We can put his viewpoint another way in order to prepare ourselves for the consequences that he derived from it. If thought is always about reality, always about what is, then it is untenable and invalid ever to hold a concept of sheer non-existence. In other words, of what is not. Because that would be a concept of nothing. In other words, it would be no concept. His key point in this respect is, to put it in a sort of funny way, but this is really the essence of it, there is no nothing. There is only some things. And the thought about nothing is therefore not a thought about anything. It's not a thought at all. All concepts must be formed within existence and refer to existence. And therefore, any theory or any philosophic position which at any point requires a concept of sheer nothing, of non-existence, according to Parmenides, is invalid on that grounds and must be dismissed right away.